Right, Mr. Donnelly, I'm going to come on to some specific incidents, the first of which relates to a ciphered detained person, D865, on the 4th of July of 2017. And the first thing I want to do is ask the evidence handler to put up on screen CPS 000025 at page 37, tab 22, Chair.
Thank you.
And if we can expand the top. This is the BBC incident log, Mr. Donnelly, which you should have seen before. And it relates to the 4th of July, Tuesday. Something on the kit broke or stopped working, need to establish why. Did manage to record, though, around lunchtime. First response, ran over Chris Donnelly, stood with two other officers outside room peering at detainee. XXX believes must have been stood for at least 1 minute, maybe two. Christie was saying, in quotation marks, not hung himself, when XXX could see clearly that there was a ligature around detainee's neck attached to TV bracket. XXX can't prove CD knew it was there, but would be extreme incompetence not to see it, can't believe didn't see. And two other officers too. XXX believes unlikely to kill himself. Brackets made so come off wall if enough force. But Algerian detainee in question, D865, known to have committed serious crimes previously, was unconscious and could have meant to commit himself serious harm. XXX said, "What's that on the bracket?" and the CD went in and took it off. So that's fairly contemporaneous narrative account, clearly by Callum Tully, to the BBC producers about what he had seen. And now let's have a look at what he said in a witness statement he made on the 23rd of November 2017. Chair, that's tab 32. If we can take this down, and if we can put up, please, XXSXP 000120 at page 8. Page 8. And if we scroll down to about the bottom half, on the 4th of July, and this is Callum Tully's statement to the police: "I was working my normal 13-hour shift. At some point during the afternoon, a first response was called to a self-harming incident. I arrived after about 30 seconds from when the first response was called. As I arrived, I could see 3 or 4 other DCOs stood outside the detainee's room. I knew the detainee as D865. The other DCOs were just looking at him. I could see that he had something similar to a thick lace tied around his neck. It was obvious that there was something around his neck, and I couldn't understand why no one else could see it. A DCM present at the time was Chris Donnelly. He was stood directly in front of me and had direct sight of D865. Donnelly said, 'There is nothing around his neck.' I couldn't really understand why no one could see the ligature around his neck. I was still stood outside the room, and yet I could see it clearly. I said, 'No, what's that tied around his neck?' At that point, Chris Donnelly took his fish knife from his belt and cut the ligature off. I was stood about 2 meters away and could clearly see the ligature. D865 was lying on his front, head to the side, was motionless on the floor. and appeared unconscious. I could see that the thick lace was tied to a TV bracket which would have been fixed to the wall around 7 feet up and would have held the TV, which was also on the floor with the bracket. He tried to use the bracket to hang himself. And then he says this: Chris Donnelly demonstrated hatred towards the detainees. I'm sure he was intent on letting the detainees suffer. I would say that it was at least 2 minutes between the first response being called and Chris Donnelly removing the ligature from the detainee's neck. The nurse came in soon after to check him over. At this point, D865 was sat on the bed. The nurse tried to establish why he appeared down, and Connolly just said, it should be Donnelly, were you trying to kill yourself? So that's what Callum Tully had to say, and he dealt with this in his evidence as well. I don't know if you followed it, Mr. Donnelly, but we can see that as well. It's tab 37, INQ 000098. And he dealt with this on the 2nd of December in the course of his evidence. First of all, at page 6. And it begins at the top on page 6. You'll see that the transcript is divided into 4 pages, so it's page 23 of the transcript, but page 6 of the overall document. And this was me asking him questions on the 2nd of December, asking him about the 4th of July incident. And you can see, and I'm not going to read it all, that this is where I started asking him questions. Mr. Donnelly, have you had a chance to look at what he had to say?
No.
You know it's been available to you?
Yes.
But you've not bothered to look?
Well, I didn't know it had happened.
You didn't know that he gave evidence in November and December, is that what you mean? Or what didn't you know happened?
No, I didn't know that he'd given evidence.
So, my telling you, is that the first time you've understood that Callum Tully gave evidence to the inquiry?
It doesn't surprise me, but I hadn't followed it.
Hadn't registered?
No.
All right. Why is that, do you think?
What, that I hadn't watched the...
Well, why didn't you know that Callum Tully gave evidence? Had you nowhere seen any media about the fact that Callum Tully had given evidence?
I hadn't followed it at all.
At all?
No.
So my telling you that he gave evidence to the inquiry in November and December last year, is that a complete surprise?
No.
It's not a surprise?
No.
So you did know?
I didn't know specifically that he'd given evidence, but it's not a surprise to me that he would be called to give evidence.
Right. So let me be clear. When is the first time that you understood that Callum Tully gave evidence to the inquiry? Not whether it was a surprise or not, but when is the first time that you've understood that Callum Tully gave evidence, in fact, over 4 days?
I can't remember when I became aware.
Okay. But presumably before you are sitting there now in the witness box?
Yes.
But you've not tried to find out what he actually said?
No.
Because?
Because I haven't followed the case at all, the inquiry,
Yeah.
and I've just come to give my evidence.
Yeah, I get that, but don't you think that's something that you might have shown a little interest in doing? Just struggling to understand why you weren't at the very least curious to see what he'd said about you.
Well, like I said, didn't want to hear what he said about anybody, so I haven't followed it.
So is it because you are angry with him and you don't want to see what he had to say?
Not especially that. I just wanted to come and give my evidence without looking at what he said or...
All right. Well, let's have a look on the next page, page 7, which is page 26, because one of the things I asked him about was whether delaying going to the aid of a detainee in these circumstances, if we scroll down, please, it's page 26. Page 26. That's it. In bold, I wouldn't say this was widespread. I mean, most staff at Brook House, when faced with a detainee with a ligature around his neck, who's either fallen to the ground or was swinging from a banister or bracket or whatever it was, would make every effort to preserve life. This was just a particularly sickening incident in which DCM, he meant Donnelly, appeared to be intent on allowing the detainee to suffer. I take it you don't agree with that?
No, I don't.
Yeah. And can you think of any reason why Callum Tully might have said that?
Not really, no.
Well, either he's made it up for reasons of his own, or that was his honest, genuine appraisal of you as a person. Which would you say it is?
I can't really put my mind in his mind. If he thinks, if that's his genuine opinion of me as a person, that I deliberately let somebody suffer, then he's mistaken.
Right. Mistaken. Let's actually look at the transcript of these events, which, as I say, took place on the 4th of July. We can take that down, thank you, and put up the transcript TRN 00033, tab 39. On the second page, please. And so this is a transcript of the events. This is the transcript taken from Callum Tully's recording of these events. And you see at line 21, he says, has he tied something to the... And at line 22, you say, no, it's not round his neck. And Tully says, no, but what's that tied around the actual bracket? And you say, he's not charged, is he? That may be a mistranscription. And then he offers you a fish knife. You say something inaudible, but he says, here you are, use it. And then you produce a fish knife from your belt and you cut the lace or whatever it was from D865's neck and discard it on the ground. That's all I need. Okay, that will help him. And a member of the medical staff is present to say, need to get some air in him. Now, his allegation, Callum Tully's allegation, is that it took you a couple of minutes for you to remove a ligature from the man's neck, even though it was pointed out to you. You accept that, don't you?
No, I don't.
You don't accept? What don't
No.
you accept?
As soon as it was pointed out to me, I removed it immediately.
Immediately. Because what Callum Tully was telling the police and the impact or the import of what he is saying is that it was pointed out to you, but you deliberately delayed going to his aid. You understand the allegation?
Yes.
It's a serious allegation.
Yes.
Yeah. But you say Callum Tully is completely wrong because I, Chris Donnelly, went to his aid immediately. Is that what you mean? There was no delay.
Yeah, we went into the room with me and another officer. I assumed he was first on seeing the other officer.
The other officer of Puco?
That's right.
Yeah.
And I hold my hands up. I should have carried out the checks myself, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And then when Callum turned up, he pointed out that there was a ligature round
Yeah.
his neck.
Yeah.
And as soon as he said there is a ligature round his neck, I took my fish knife out and removed it.
Yeah. So, so that we understand from your perspective, the other officer who was, I think, a DCO or Puco was there first. He points something out to you. You go into the room. Is that what we should understand?
No,
or were
he
you
didn't.
outside the room?
No, I attended,
Yeah.
and I think Officer Puku was already in the room, and I went into the room as well.
Yeah. This was what, E-wing?
I can't remember which wing it was.
Was this a vulnerable detainee?
No.
It wasn't.
It wasn't Echo Wing, which is the vulnerable detainee
E-wing.
wing.
So you're sure he wasn't on E-wing,
Yeah.
and you assume he wasn't vulnerable because he wasn't on E-wing?
No, I don't think I would make that assumption, no.
So are you saying that as far as you're concerned, 865 was not vulnerable?
No, I'm not saying that.
So you don't know?
No, all I'm saying is that I should have checked for the ligature, and I didn't.
Yeah, but
And
what I'm asking you something slightly different at the moment,
Uh-huh.
which is whether at the time you went into that room, obviously somebody who makes an attempt on his own life is vulnerable.
Yes.
But did you know before he did that that man in particular had vulnerabilities or was prone to self-harm or commit or attempt to commit suicide?
I believe he was on an ACDT, so yes,
Yes.
I did.
Because if Callum Tully is right, that you deliberately delayed going to this man's aid, then you'll admit, Mr. Donnelly, that it shows a certain callousness, doesn't it?
It certainly would show
Yeah.
a degree of
But
callousness,
you,
yeah.
you deny it.
Yes.
Can we go back to one of your witness statements? And it's the second witness statement that you made on the 16th of February. Do you have it in front of you, Mr. Donnelly?
Yes.
Yeah. And what you say at paragraph 11 on page 7, we don't have to put it up, is I have reviewed CPS 000025, page 37, so that was the BBC incident log, and XXP 00 should be one further zero, that's it, 000120 at page 8. CPS 000025, page 37, doesn't mention my name or indicate I was involved. Well, certainly the document we've seen does mention your name, but be that as it may, at A, Callum Tully states it was 2 minutes between the first response being called and me entering the room. He doesn't state I waited outside the room for 2 minutes. I wouldn't do that as Oscar 1. He does not state, and I do not recall where in the building I was when the first response was called. I may have been at the other end of the building or in a separate building entirely. I always respond immediately to first response calls, and I reject the allegation I waited outside the room. As soon as I saw the ligature, I cut it off. As I've already stated, it was an oversight that it had not been cut off sooner. I learned from this incident and it has not been repeated. And B, I utterly and categorically deny that I expressed hatred towards any detainee at any time at Brook House. The detainees are there for us to look after. We provide them with care. We do our best for them. If they need extra help, then we provide that. We treat them with respect. We let judges decide which door of the centre they leave. If the judge says that they have to be returned, then we'll facilitate that. If the judge says that they will be released, then I will write a ticket and shake their hand. I believe Callum Tully's remark comes from his preconceived political and professional agenda and his naive misunderstanding of the environment he worked in. Do you still hold to those views, Mr. Donnelly?
Yes, I do.
So you think that, although I asked you a few minutes ago why Callum Tully, in your view, was saying this or what the options available were, but according to this, a statement you signed off only days ago, it was all about a preconceived political and professional agenda. So what, just making it up for his own ends?
The fact that he said that I acted out of hatred, I believe,
No.
that's the case.
I'd further like to comment that I, unlike Callum Tully, didn't break the law, breach my contract with my employer, deliberately refused to follow company and Home Office policies, fail in my duty of care towards detainees, or betray the trust of my fellow officers for financial and professional gain. I find it ridiculous that someone like Callum Tully is asked to comment on my inner thoughts and emotions, and his opinions are recorded and placed in the public domain as if they carried some credibility, which I believe by the end of this inquiry it will be public knowledge that they do not. I've always acted in good faith. Callum Tully clearly did not. And you stick by those views, I assume, Mr. Donnelly?
I said them, so yes.
Yeah. So, so the picture we have is not only from your perspective, by and large, Brook House was a happy place, but the spin that the BBC, with Callum Tully's assistance, put on Brook House was, as you said earlier, unfair, biased, and really based on preconceptions, political ideology, and all the rest of it.
Yes.
Yeah. Can I show you, please, something you ought to have seen? It's at tab 19 for you, Chair, and I'm going to ask for this document to go up. It's CJS 005952. And what this is, Mr. Donnelly, and you should have seen it before. Ordinarily, there's a photograph of you there, but it's been removed from the document, redacted out, is G4S's investigation report. You've seen this?
Yeah.
And if we look on the next page, we find two allegations which were to be investigated. The BBC raised allegations which may constitute misconduct in a letter of the 24th of August to G4S about DCM Donnelly's alleged involvement in the following incidents. The first of which I'll come back to is an incident on the 3rd of July, the second of which on the 4th of July, after detainee D865 tried to hang himself in his room. You said he had not tied anything to his neck when it was apparent the detainee had in fact tied a television cable around his neck and was unconscious. You didn't remove the ligature around his neck until approximately 2 minutes after the medical emergency was announced. And if we go then please to page 3, at the foot of the page, allegation 2 is set out more fully. We find the same allegations in bold type. DCM Connolly, it says all the way through, clearly it's about you, Donnelly, confirmed he was on duty on the 4th of July. He was asked to explain the incident and the allegation made against him. Next page, please. At the top, DCM Donnelly stated that he responded to a first response call on A wing, so that helps us as to where it was. He stated he made his way from B wing to the emergency and commented that it took him about a minute to arrive. On his arrival, stated he observed PCO, is that right, or should it have been DCO?
DCO.
DCO Opoku in room A110, and the detainee was lying on his side with a television beneath his head. DCM Donnelly stated that on his arrival he could see the detainee 865 was breathing, semi-conscious and groaning. Stated he was joined by other staff members responding to the incident. Recalled someone asking him in the room if something was tied around his neck. On closer inspection, DCM Donnelly noticed a thin cord tied loosely around the detainee's neck. Stated that the cord was loose enough for him to get his fingers underneath and cut the ligature off with his fish knife. described the ligature as a blue shoelace and not a black TV cable, commenting that a black TV cable would be more difficult to cut with a fish knife and the shoelace cut easily and was removed quickly. When asked about the delay, Donnelly acknowledged that on arrival at the scene in the room he missed the ligature, acknowledged when questioned about his training regarding first on scene that preservation of life is his priority, which should have included checking for ligatures, stated he assumed wrongly that DCO Apoku, who raised the original alarm and was first on the scene, had removed the ligature. He acknowledged there was a delay in removing the ligature, and the allegation made by the BBC may be accurate. So pausing there, do you accept that the allegation that was made by Callum Tully was in fact accurate?
What, that I did delay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. He was very clear that there was no intent on his part to cause 865 any further harm or distress, and genuinely didn't see the ligature when he arrived. Said all the relevant documentation was completed, said he had worked here a long time, takes his job very seriously, responds to incidents quickly, and has saved many lives. Now, just focusing on what you said, this is clearly a summary of an interview that you had with G4S. So that we understand it, you accept, as you've just told us, there was a delay. And when did the time start ticking for that delay to have occurred from your perspective? When was it obvious that you should have done what you failed to do, and what do you say the delay was?
I should have checked for myself the minute I arrived in the room.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
Yeah.
As soon as Callum mentioned that there was actually a ligature around his neck,
Yeah.
I got my fish knife out and removed it. But I accept that I didn't do what I should have done.
No. And are you prepared to accept, although of course nobody's going to hold anybody to a precise time, that it could have been to the order of 2 minutes, or do you not accept that?
In the room, possibly 2 minutes.
Yeah. So that rather suggests that what Callum Tully had to say was accurate.
Well, I think he said that I was outside the room, hovering outside the room.
Yeah.
Which isn't accurate.
So that's the quibble, is it? Whether you were inside or outside?
Yes.
There's not much of a quibble in the scheme of things, is it?
Well, I think if I'd stayed outside the room, that would have been even more unforgivable.
Which is better, being in the room and hanging around for 2 minutes before you do anything, or staying outside and hanging around for 2 minutes before doing anything?
Neither of them are good.
No.
But
So-
certainly being in the room was marginally less bad than not entering the room.
Yeah. Not much between them, really, is there,
Not
Mr.
really.
Donnelly? No. Let me ask you something else. We have page 4 up. Right at the top of the page, as we have it on screen, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th paragraph down. DCM Donnelly recalled someone asking him in the room if something was tied around his neck. Who was the someone?
I'm guessing it was Callum.
Are you guessing?
I think it was Callum.
Well, who else was there?
There were several people there.
You see, by this time you knew what the allegation was, and you knew that it was Callum Tully who was alleging that you had delayed. Had you deliberately just avoided his name? Rather than say, Callum Tully asked you in the room if something was tied around this man's neck, just interested as to why it was someone rather than Callum Tully when it was obviously Callum Tully.
I really don't have an answer for that.
You don't have an answer. Let's look at what Ben Apoku had to say. If we go to page 5. This is a summary of what he had to tell G4S. He confirmed he raised the alarm. on discovery of 865 lying on the floor in his room, initially stated that he saw 865 lying on the floor with a ligature tied around his neck and a TV bracket had come away from the wall. When challenged, stated he'd waited at the door until first responders arrived and didn't render first aid or remove the ligature. Stated when enough people arrived, he left the unit and took no further part in the management of the incident. Asked about his responsibilities as first on scene, acknowledged his role was to provide emergency aid and preserve life. And then he requested a break from the interview to consult with his colleague. And on his return, changed his version of events and said he didn't see any ligature when he observed the detainee lying on the floor. Said he was in shock and froze, and this is why he took no action. Said that when DCM Donnelly arrived, he provided no handover. And although this is a summary, there's no mention of Callum Tully there either. Now, was there any possibility you and he spoke about events afterwards?
No.
No. A bit of a curiosity here that the Puku says originally that he saw the man lying on the floor with a ligature tied around his neck, and after a break completely does a 180 and changes his story immediately. You understand that? Why he changed his story?
I don't know why he changed his story, no.
And then over the page, please, page 6. Allegation 2 was substantiated. And so the conclusions of G4S are the incident was captured on the Panorama programme. Opoku raised the alarm, saw him lying on the floor, failed to render immediate first aid and remove the ligature. And Opoku waited for the first response to arrive, then entered the room. You see, if Opoku had seen a ligature around the man's neck, which was his first account, then he would have said to you, when you arrived, he not having done what he should have done, which is to remove the ligature, he would have said to you, Chris, this man's got a ligature around his neck, we need to take it off. But having changed his story, having originally suggested that he saw the ligature and then changed it to say he hadn't after all, it rather suggests that A, he avoids any responsibility himself, but also not having seen the ligature, avoids responsibility for not giving you the information that you needed. Did you two discuss this after the events?
No, I haven't spoken to Ben, no, not at all.
You never once
No.
mentioned this to him, he
No,
not to you?
absolutely not, no.
Opoku waited for the first response to arrive, then entered the room. DCM Donnelly arrived approximately 1 minute later, entered the room, didn't initially observe a ligature, and tied around the neck of 865. DCM Donnelly was prompted by DCO Tully, who arrived in the room, that there may be a ligature tied around his neck. Now, G4S may have put 2 and 2 together, because it seems you didn't mention the name Callum Tully when you spoke to them. Whereas in their conclusions, in substantiating the allegation against you, here we see Callum Tully's name mentioned. Do you understand how that happened?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, do you agree it appears as if G4S must have concluded it was only Callum Tully who told you about the ligature around the man's neck? Because if Opoku was telling the truth, he never saw it.
Yeah.
And you never saw it until you were prompted to go to him and then remove it from his neck.
I'm not sure why I didn't mention Callum Tully's name, but it was even on the footage, I recognised Callum Tully's voice. Prompted me that there was something around his neck.
Yeah. And presumably you saw the footage, did you, before or during this investigation?
Yes, I think the interview was after the programme on air. I can't quite remember.
Your interview?
Yeah.
Yes, it would have been probably around September,
Yeah.
a couple of
Yeah.
days afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most people were interviewed around the 6th
Yeah.
or the 7th of September, I think. Right, so Donnelly was prompted by DCO Tully, who arrived in the room, that there may be a ligature around his neck. On further inspection of the neck, DCM Donnelly observed a ligature around the neck, immediately used his fish knife to cut it away. And then there's a bit more information about it. Can we look, please, at another document, CJS 004312. Can I add, I ought to say it does, we don't have to put it back up, that on page 7, the conclusions of G4S were that the team was satisfied you didn't act with any intent to cause harm or distress. You'll remember that?
Yes.
Right. CJS 004312, Chair, that's tab 14 for you. Now, this is an incident report that you completed, is that right? You've seen this before.
Yes.
And we can see it's for the 4th of July. It was timed at 12:25. And if we look on page 2, is this your handwriting, Mr. Donnelly?
It is.
And this is your statement, your incident statement. And it reads this way, and because it's your handwriting, if I get anything wrong, please correct me. I, DCM Chris Donnelly, was on duty at Brook House, IRC Gatwick, Tuesday the 4th of July 2017 as detainee custody manager, Oscar 2, in charge of B Wing and detainee reception. And so on this occasion, you weren't Oscar 1, you were Oscar 2, which is what? Residential duties?
Oscar 2 is mainly reception, overseeing reception and visits, and I think Bravo Wing, which was the induction wing at that time.
Or it was supposed to be?
Yes.
Yeah. At 12:25, I was on B Wing when I heard an emergency response call on the radio announcing first response to A110. Made my way there immediately with other officers. On arrival, I saw DCO B Opoku by the open door of A110. Inside on the floor, face down, was a detainee I knew to be D865. He was lying under the place where the TV should be in recovery position. TV was off the wall, and he was lying face down on top of it. There was a thin blue cord, like a shoelace, round A65's neck, and attached to the TV bracket which had broken off the wall. I used my fish knife to cut the ligature off from around his neck. It was tight, but not so tight I couldn't easily get my fingers in to cut it. At that point, healthcare arrived. Next page, please. I could see when I cut the ligature that A65 was still alive but not visibly conscious, because he moved and reacted when I cut the ligature but wouldn't answer or open his eyes when I called to him. After healthcare had been with him several minutes, he regained consciousness, got up and sat on his bed. By this time, Oscar 1, DCM Loughton, and A-Wing manager DCM R. Giraldo had arrived. It was agreed that an ACDT would be opened by DCM Giraldo. I instructed him to do so, and also that D865 should move to E-Wing on ACDT, constant supervision. When he had recovered sufficiently, I asked him if he had tried to kill himself. He replied, I don't know. His roommate, D1538, said when I asked him that he'd gone to the toilet, heard a loud bang, had come out of the toilet and found 865 on the floor, just as I described. is that he then called A Wing office on cell call, and DCO Opoku had arrived and called first response. This ends my report at 1:30. So the writing of this report must have taken you the better part of an hour.
Quite possibly, yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything that's wrong about it?
It doesn't mention that Callum Tully had to point out the ligature to me.
Well, again, we don't see the name Callum Tully, do we?
No.
We don't see the fact that Callum Tully drew your attention to the fact that there was a ligature around this man's neck. It doesn't draw attention to the fact that there was a delay before you attended him.
Sorry?
It doesn't draw attention to the fact that there was a delay before you attended on him. In fact, if you read this, particularly the middle or third paragraph and the fourth paragraph on page 2, which we can go back to, the green highlighted parts, shoelace round neck, attached TV bracket, which had broken off the wall. I used my fish knife. There should be at least another paragraph in between there, shouldn't there, Mr. Donnelly?
Yes, there should.
Why did you leave out information which, of course, wouldn't have made you look particularly good? Unforgivable is your word. Why did you leave it out?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
It feels a bit like a cover-up, doesn't it?
Possibly.
Yeah. I mean, in the end, Mr. Donnelly, nobody wants to fess up to omissions, mistakes, things they should have done differently or better. And certainly nobody wants to fess up to deliberate omissions. But do you understand, in leaving out a narrative which was very important to what happened, it lends itself to the suggestion that what you had done is exactly what Callum Tully suggests you did, which was deliberately failing to go to this man's aid. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And in deliberately omitting important information, if this man had died, you would be looking at the wrong end of a criminal accusation, wouldn't you? Of at least perverting the course of justice, potentially.
Yes.
Yeah. So why did you leave it out?
Probably because I didn't want to make myself look bad.
No.
And the guy, the resident was recovered.
Yeah. I mean, but for Callum Tully recording what had happened, nobody would have been the wiser, would they?
No.
No. Can we think a little more about D865? Because the ACDT was opened that day, is that right?
It looks that way.
Can we open it up on screen? It's CJS 001034 at tab 7, Chair. And if we scroll down to the bottom, 4th of July, it was opened. 2nd of August, closed. Is that correct?
It appears to be yes.
And if we go to the next, well, if we go to the, we'll just scroll up to the top again, please. And then if we can go to the next page, triggers warning signs to prompt immediate review and person/department to be called. Being in detention for 2 years possibly suffering from depression. And if we scroll down, we see the date of that. 4th of July, Angela O'Connor. Who was she?
She would be the ACDT assessor who asked the preliminary questions about the background to the resident, what the current state of mind is.
And if we go then to the next page, page 3, at the top, we'll see the notification form to be completed by DCM. Has the detainee self-harmed? Yes. Tried to kill himself by hanging from the TV cables in his room. Who completed that?
I'm not sure.
I think we'll find at the bottom it was Mr. Giraldo. If he said that, that was wrong.
What about trying to kill himself?
But no, with TV cables, weren't we told
Right.
it was a shoelace?
Yes.
And has an incident report been completed and passed to the DD? The DD is the duty director.
That's right.
Awaiting completion by the DCM. That was you. And the incident report is the document I've just read from. If we go to page 10, again, Mr. Giraldo, 4th of July, if we go to the top, he ticks the box suicide attempt or statement of intent to kill self under a concern and keep safe form. What is a concern and keep safe form?
That's the page in the ACDT document outlining the reasons why the document was opened.
And today at approximately 12:30, 865 tried to hurt himself by hanging himself from the TV cable in his room. Hurt himself is probably a bit of an understatement. And if we go to the next page, which is a page I think you completed, if we look to the bottom, please. Is this your document?
Yes.
And your handwriting on the same occasion at 1:45, top of the page. Move to E001 on constant supervision. By whom? Was that G4S?
Yes.
Completed 4th of July. Frequency of staff support constant. And phone access mobile in possession. So this is an immediate action plan for what? His move to E-Wing and the support that would be offered to him.
The immediate action plan is complete for every ACDT within an hour of the document being opened.
Did you know that D865 had been on ACDT previously? So on the 4th of July, at the time that you entered that room, A110, on A-Wing, did you know that this man had previously been on ACDT?
I believe I did.
Let's look at the document, CJS 000955. Which chair I think you'll find. Tab 40, yeah.
Thank you.
So if we look at the front page, again it relates to 865. If we scroll down to the bottom, we'll see he was on ACDT between the 18th and the 28th of May. And can we go to page 20? And if we look at the top, you were the case manager, yeah? And this was a case review document, dated the 22nd of May at 10 o'clock in the morning. C. Donnelly, you're the case manager. Karen Churcher is the RMN. And two others, DCO and Home Office, are named. and the summary of the review. And was this written by you, Mr. Donnelly?
I think it would be yes.
D865 subdued at interview appeared to be in low mood. I asked how he was feeling today. He said okay, but looked down in mood. I asked him for an update on his case. He said that the probation service had contacted his friend outside on Friday and that they, probation, would be visiting the friend's property sometime this week to assess whether that address was suitable for him to be bailed there. Seemed quite upbeat about that. He reiterated when asked that he had no thoughts of harming himself or taking his own life. Wants to see his family again. The nurse also advised him he had an appointment to see the nurse at 2:30. Said he didn't have a solicitor, that he is using BID, and that he has not yet made a bail application through them. All present agreed that the ACDT should remain open due to his low mood and unresolved bail issues, agreed that the risk of self-harm was low and that accordingly the observation level could be reduced. So, are you prepared to accept, having seen that, Mr. Donnelly, that by the time the events of the 4th of July came around, you knew something about this man and knew that there were risks around his mental health?
Yes.
Yeah. Of course, he wasn't the only person who bore witness to what had happened, because he had a roommate, D1538. And if we look at another document, Chair, behind tab 21, CJS 0007239, and if we go please to pages 8, begin with 8 at the bottom. This is the 5th of July, and these notes, medical notes, relate to D1538, not to D865. It's the 5th of July, 1520, surgery, Churcher, Karen Churcher, who's the mental health nurse. Top of the next page, please. Examination seen on wing after request from DCM Donnelly. So it was your request, was it, for D1538 to be seen by the nurse?
Yes.
Because
He'd witnessed something traumatic and he might need some assistance or seen by a mental health nurse.
Can you speak up a bit?
Sorry, because he'd witnessed something traumatic and that he might need some assistance.
Yeah. Clearly he was traumatised by the event, shared a room, as this note says, with a fellow detainee who attempted to hang himself yesterday, states he is shaken, has recurrent thoughts and dreams about it, is also stressed about being detained, and has been placed on a raised concern. What does that mean, a raised concern?
It's a document that should be open for no more than 2 days. It involves regular observations by officers and a daily review with a DCM to assess whether it needs to, if it can be closed or an ACDT needs to be opened.
Had a fellow detainee in his room when visited and suggested that he ask to share with his friend, would like to be referred to the mental health team. First of all, Mr. Donnelly, and I'm asked in particular to ask you these questions on behalf of Duncan Lewis, solicitors. What training did you receive to equip you to care for someone who'd been an eyewitness to an attempted suicide?
Just the basic safer community training about the options that are open to us. So, does an ACDT need to be opened?
Can you just speak up? It may be just me.
Sorry. Does an ACDT need to be opened? Is it a raised concern? Do we need to refer them to an RMN? That's basically the training that we had.
Right. Do you think that equipped you to deal with, in particular, D1538 and his traumatisation by what he'd witnessed?
No, that's why I referred him to a mental health
Yeah.
professional.
And do you know offhand whether there was a follow-up to his request for mental health? A referral, as we see in this note.
I believe he was seen by the RMN.
But as far as that, what, you don't personally follow it up? You leave it with healthcare?
Yes.
And do you happen to know at that time, in the G4S years, what measures were in place across the Immigration Removal Centre to support detainees who witness self-harm and suicide?
No, I don't.
What measures are in place now at Serco?
I would imagine it would be the same for any resident.
Yeah.
If there's a suspicion that they might harm themselves, we'd open an ACDT. Otherwise, we might open a raised concern. We'd refer them to healthcare, and if they thought they needed a supported living plan, then that would be opened.
And so that applies now as well as Serco
Yes.
does it? It's a similar system or identical system?
Pretty much identical.
We saw, didn't we, in the G4S investigation report, that they substantiated the allegation that you were inappropriately slow in removing the ligature from 865's neck on the 4th of July. Do you think that, having been there all of those years, in 2017 as you were, that there was an element of desensitisation to self-harm and attempted suicide? In other words, was it normalised?
We certainly saw a lot of it. I don't think I would class that as desensitised.
No? Having seen a lot of it, however you class it, do you think it had an impact on you? How you reacted to these things? What you thought about it?
No, I honestly don't. I think in that incident, I didn't do what I should have done. But that was an oversight, and it's certainly not something that's happened since.
No.
Or before.
What explains it, though?
My wrong assumption that somebody else had done the checks. It's as simple as that.
We know nobody else had,
Yes.
and we know that Mr. Apuko decided to change his mind about what he had and hadn't seen. The moment you entered that room and you saw what was laid out in front of you, a man on the ground with a television off the wall, you didn't need many more triggers to understand what might have happened, did you?
No.
No. So what the inquiry would struggle to understand is why you didn't react, given your experience.
Like I said, it was an oversight. I shouldn't have assumed that somebody else would have done the first checks. And
Well, you can only make assumptions based on what you see around you or what perhaps what you're told. But did you make any inquiry of anybody else, whether they had actually done the check that you yourself accept you should have done?
no, I didn't.
No. So what explains all of this, Mr. Donnelly? You don't get the information from anyone around you. Nobody says anything to you. There's a man on the ground with a television on the floor. And then Callum Tully comes along and says, look, there's a ligature around his neck. Before he points that out to you and before you actually react to it, what everybody might be struggling to understand is why you've done nothing. And had it not been for Callum Tully, who knows what the outcome might have been. So what's the explanation?
I'm not honestly sure what the explanation is.
You had a long time to think about it.
It was a wrong assumption on my part that Ben had done the check. I can't say any more than that.
Were you one of those who perhaps subscribed to the idea that self-harm and suicidal behaviour was attention-seeking or manipulation by detainees?
No.
You seem hesitant.
Some residents, I would say yes.
So some residents, what you're telling us is, would what, use self-harm as a means of seeking attention?
They would use the threat of self-harm in the belief that it would help their case.
Yeah. How could you tell the difference between those who were genuine and those who were simply being manipulative or even disruptive?
We always opened the ACDT anyway, so that we didn't have to guess.
No, but somebody could be very good at manipulation and be manipulating every officer around him and the healthcare team. Well, what training did you and your brother and sister officers have to say this is clearly a case of a man who is ill, as against this is clearly the case of a man who is just disruptive and not ill? How did you know the difference? Opening an ACDT doesn't tell you one way or the other because it's all subjective. How did you objectively make that determination?
I wouldn't.
Who did?
What we would do is open the document, and subsequent to that we'd have multidisciplinary case reviews where we'd have the Home Office, the mental health professionals, chaplaincy, Home Office input. So we wouldn't make that determination.
One of the problems with you officers not making that determination is, do you agree, it could be very easy to slip into the idea that they're all attention seekers?
What I would say is that we always erred on the side of caution,
Which means,
that we would open an ACDT document and begin that process.
so you would assume in all cases that the man was vulnerable and potentially mentally unwell.
We would assume that if somebody says that they're going to harm themselves, that they might.
In between the ACD that was opened in respect of D865 and closed on the 28th of May, and the one that was opened on the 4th of July and ultimately closed on the 2nd of August, what was going on in his life? How do we know, if no other ACDTs were open, whether this very vulnerable man was being looked after and properly cared for?
So I'm not sure.
Well, you set great store by the opening of an ACDT.
Yes.
Because the idea of that is to monitor somebody who is believed to be at risk.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of D865, we have seen two ACDT forms. One that was opened on the 17th of May and closed on the 28th, and the other that was opened on the 4th of July because of these events and ultimately closed on the 2nd of August. What I would like to know is, in the gap in between, assuming there were no other ACDT forms in his case, is he being unsupervised?
He would be supervised in the same way that all the residents would be supervised, that the staff would interact with him, observe him.
But not in the way a mentally unwell person should be.
Possibly not, no.
No, well, definitely not, because if there is no ACDT, or if he's not in E-wing on constant observations, then there is a risk that somebody like him falls through the gap, through the crack, and then does what he does on the 4th of July. And that's what happened here. And there must be many 865s who came and went through Brook House who performed in exactly the same way. Is that something you're prepared to agree with?
I would agree it's a possibility. The ACDT is not closed lightly. It's multidisciplinary with the input of a mental health professional. But it is possible.
Yeah. Let's move on. We're going slightly backwards in time to the 13th of May. And I want to ask you about another detained person, D687. And if we can please put up on screen a use of force form, which is CJS 005652. D687, the date is the 13th of May, and if we go to page 15 of this document, there is footage, and you'll have seen it, Mr. Donnelly. Do you remember it was a detained man who was due to be transported away from Brook House to the Verne,
Yes.
and tied himself to either the cistern or a handle in a disabled lavatory, sitting on the loo, refusing to move, and telling you of his distress, how long he'd been at Brook House, that he wanted to be buried next to his brother, and so on and so forth. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah, hard to forget. And here on page 15 is your statement within the use of force pack, Annex A. And if we can go to the bottom, please. You were the handcuff officer, according
Yes.
to this. And if we go over the page, IDCM Chris Donnelly was on duty at Brook House Saturday the 13th of May, Oscar 2, charge of detainee reception, discharge and B-wing. At approximately 1:30, I was informed that a detainee I know to be 687 was in discharge waiting room toilet with a ligature around his neck. He was in the waiting room awaiting suitable crew move to the Verne IRC. Clear up a mystery, at least for me, if for no one else. Suitable crew, what does it actually mean?
It means that as the contractor, we are obliged to present the detainee under force if necessary. It just means that there's enough officers in the escorting crew to take him under restraint.
Right.
So it has to happen.
Yeah, it's just the word suitable crew, which seemed pretty
Yeah, it is.
meaningless.
Yeah, it's
but
a
is
bit
that just a sort of
Jargon.
Brook House or jargon?
It's not just Brook House. It's it comes from the Home Office. It's on the movement orders. It'll say in country or suitable crew.
Right. I went to speak to him with some other officers. He was sitting on the toilet of the detainee discharge toilet with a white ligature around his neck, saying he didn't want to go to the Verne, too far away from his family. He wouldn't desist or remove the ligature despite several DCOs, myself and DCM, is it Farnell, trying to persuade him. Duty Director Dan Horton arrived, and after further attempts to de-escalate peacefully, Duty Director Horton initiated a spontaneous use of force to prevent self-harm. He grabbed the ligature from 687. Other officers, DCM Farrell, is it Farrell or Farnell? I think it's Farrell.
Farrell.
DCOs Martin and Tully then controlled 687 on the floor. I made the decision that to move 687 from the area, he would need to be handcuffed for his own safety and the safety of officers. I applied the ratchet cuffs to 687 when he was on the floor. He was then helped to his feet, and he walked compliantly to detainee discharge to talk to waiting task or suitable crew. After 5 to 10 minutes, he had de-escalated sufficiently that the task or crew asked for the cuffs to be removed, and they accepted him into their custody. So that's what you had to say at the time. And that report presumably was written by you on the same date, because it's dated the 13th of May. Yeah?
Right.
Can we look at another document, please? It's for you, Chair, tab 24, and it's HOM 002652. And this is your account to the PSU, who were asking you about it on the 17th of January 2018. And one of the questions was, why, if you were wearing body-worn camera, you didn't activate it, and you'll remember that. And if you look about 2/3 of the way down, in fact at the bottom of the page, as it is up on the screen, as it was up on the screen, as it is up on the screen, he said that the slings were to hold body-worn camera in response to why there was no body-worn BWV, BWC, it doesn't really matter, body-worn camera given, or footage, given there were cameras worn by 2 managers. And why the camera wasn't switched on, he had, quote, evidently not, end quote, switched it on, and he could not remember why not. Now, what is your explanation for not switching it on? I mean, you were at the time a very experienced man. Why didn't you put it on?
Not experienced with body-worn cameras. I'm not sure how long they'd been introduced. I just simply forgot to put it on.
I mean, do you accept you weren't most directly involved in this? It was Mr. Horton who removed the ligature. I mean, once he was, I think, taken to the ground, you applied the handcuffs, is that right?
Yeah.
So can you explain, it wasn't just one of you, it was 2 of you who didn't activate. It wasn't just you who forgot to do so, it was also Mr. Farrell. Any explanation for that?
Apart from the fact that the body ones were a fairly new introduction to our way of life, and we just weren't in the habit of activating them.
If we go to tab 30, for you, Chair, and to a different document, the investigation report, which you will have seen into this by the PSU, HOM 002725. And if we go, once we get there, to page 44, please. And we'll see the paragraph at the bottom, 7.5.31. Panorama footage didn't show the use of force. Officers could be heard trying to de-escalate, and someone said, okay, it's off, right the ligatures away. Soon after, all the officers moved forward and the footage ended. I was satisfied the footage ended because DCO Tully had become involved in the use of force, so was unable to continue covert filming. A major concern was that 2 managers had body-worn cameras on but hadn't activated this, Donnelly and Farrell, as this would have been overwhelming evidence of events in the toilet area. DCM Donnelly said, and this is obviously from the interview that I just touched on in January 2018, said he couldn't remember why he hadn't switched his on. Farrell said he couldn't remember if he had had a camera on the strap or was just wearing the strap. He said the cameras were small and there had only been a limited amount. He could not remember switching it on. The policy said BWC shall be worn at all times while the manager is on duty 24/7, unless an exception is granted by the G4S duty director. Staff should activate the camera to record all contacts with detainees in the performance of official duties dealing with incidents and responding to alarm calls, use of force. If it is not activated, a record should be made of the reasons. A BWC recording shouldn't be made in an area where individuals have an expectation of privacy, for example, the toilet. None of the officers said they hadn't switched the camera on because of the latter, so it's reasonable to assume this wasn't a factor in their decision. And the report continues in that vein until 7.5.35, whilst an unsatisfactory response in relation to events on the 13th of May, it does show the significant organisational failings in respect of body-worn cameras have now been addressed. It doesn't detract from the fact that the report said it was used, yet none is available. I mean, did you accept that you had plenty of time to activate it had you remembered to do so?
Yes.
Yeah, there were several minutes, I think,
Yeah.
you were there before, as it were, any action took place. And are you prepared to accept that this was a serious failure in the circumstances?
Yes, it was.
Now, I'd like to take you to the transcript because I've got some other questions to ask you about this. Chair, Mr. Livingston reminds me that it's break time, maybe his break time anyway. So can I suggest, before I move on to that, that we break for 15 minutes, I make it 20 past, come back at 25 to?
Yeah, we'll allow you to have a cup
Thank
of tea,
you.
Mr. Donnelly, and we'll return in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Donnelly, I was inviting you before we broke to look at the transcript, or parts of the transcript, of the events of the 13th of May. If we can put up, please, TRN 0000095 at page 33. Tab 36 for you, Chair. I know, 38. And if we go to the top of the page, now this is part of the key footage which was shown on Panorama. I'm reasonably confident, and was shown during an earlier part of the inquiry. And you see 687 at the top saying, "You put me in a body bag and out of here, lot going to take me. I've explained to you, bruv, fuck off. I swear to God I'll let myself, don't force me. Don't come near me, bruv, come near me, and I swear to God I'll let myself go. That's the only way I'm leaving this toilet, bruv. I'm telling you this now, I'm not having it. I've had enough. I don't want to live no more." And you'll see that there is a reference to Officer 4. That's you. Are you prepared to accept that you were Officer 4 and you were doing some of the talking here?
Yes.
And he says, "The reason I've given because of my mum," and then Officer 4 at line 1068 being you, "Then we'll wait for a minute until you pass out and then we'll cut you down. Nobody is dying today." And he says, "There's no passing out, bruv. I'm looking to die. You've got to understand, bruv. I've had enough, bruv. I don't want to live no more." Now, we could go further through the transcript. I'm not going to, in the interest of time, but you'll remember I said earlier, later on he says he wants to be buried next to his brother. He felt alienated going to the Verne, and on page 11 or 12, if we were to look, he talked about his mental health deteriorating. Now, going back to the first page, where we were, you'll remember you said, "Then we'll wait for a minute until you pass out and then we'll cut you down." And one of the things that D687 says in a statement that he made to the inquiry, it's not in your bundle, he said, "I remember that." In other words, he remembered you saying, "We'll wait for a minute until you pass out and then we'll cut you down." It added, he said, "to my feeling of worthlessness." Now, do you accept, Mr. Donnelly, that it's something you ought not to have said?
Yes.
Why did you say it?
To point out the futility of him harming himself, bearing in mind that the ligature point was 1.5 feet off the floor, and so he wouldn't have been able to harm himself, and we were all there on hand to make sure that he didn't. I was trying to persuade him to give up the ligature.
I mean, this was another man that you surely knew had mental health problems. I mean, in fact, you didn't need to know the history. You just needed to know this was a man sitting on a toilet with a ligature around his neck fastened to some item on the wall. That's enough information for anybody to say this man is not well, or potentially unwell, and is certainly vulnerable, and is certainly upset and distressed by the way he was speaking. You didn't need any more information than that, did you?
No.
No. So it was the wrong thing to say. It was certainly an unwise thing to say. Do you agree, Mr. Donnelly?
On reflection, possibly, yes.
Yeah.
But the message that I wanted to get across to him is that nobody's going to die today.
Yeah.
You're not going to die today.
Well, you did say that. But, you know, when you look at what you said here on the 13th of May, and when you look at the 4th of July, it lends itself, don't you think, Mr. Donnelly, to the suggestion that what you said to this man on the 13th of May is what you actually put into practice on the 4th of July. Unfortunate, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
No. Can I ask you about another thing in relation to this event? We looked, and let's go back to it, please, at tab 16 for you, Chair, the use of force form CJS 005652, tab 16. And we looked at what you have to say at page 15 of this document about what you did and why you did it. We go to the next page just to remind ourselves briefly. And if we go to the second page, you remember you wrote that Horton initiated a spontaneous use of force to prevent self-harm, grabbed the ligature, and Tully and Martin and other officers controlled 687 on the floor, and it was you who made the decision to move him from the area for which he would need to be handcuffed for his own safety and the safety of officers who applied the cuffs. When he was on the floor, he was then helped to his feet, and then you described how he, as it were, self-de-escalated. Can I ask you to look, please, again, but for a different reason, at your interview to the PSU on the 17th of January 2018. It's tab 24, HOM 002652. At page 3. Towards the top of the page, and here you are talking about the events of the 13th of May. The use of force was calm, reasonable. Use of force, no excessive violence, no one lost their cool. He was putting up quite a fight, lashing out with his arms and legs. So I applied the cuffs for his safety and ours. 687 had been face down, positioned for handcuffing, and his arms behind him when handcuffs were applied. Now, pausing there, Mr. Donnelly, how do you think you forgot when you made the statement in your Annex A on the 13th of May, how do you think you forgot the justification for applying the handcuffs was because he was putting up quite a fight, lashing out with his arms and legs? Because it's not there, is it?
No.
No. So how is it by the time the PSU is interviewing you on the 17th of January 2018, several months later, the story is embellished a little? How does that happen?
Well, I can say it's not embellished, and I don't know why it wasn't in the original report. It was in front of colleagues, in front of the duty director, so it was, in my mind, necessary to apply cuffs.
Yeah. Well, either it's been embellished because it didn't happen, and you sought to improve your position with the PSU, or it did, and somehow you and the other officers forgot to put it in their Annex A's in the use of force form package. What do you think it is? Because nobody else talks about him lashing out with his arms and legs. So how do you think it comes about that by the 17th of January 2018 you are adding to the story?
I think it should have been in the original statements, and I don't know why it wasn't.
Well, there's one obvious answer, Mr. Donnelly, because it didn't happen that way.
Okay. I don't think that's the case.
You don't think?
No.
No. I mean, the reality is that he wasn't lashing out, either with his arms or with his legs, and he was, in the circumstances, fairly easily subdued, wasn't he?
I don't think so, no.
Well, we've only just read the statement that you made on the day, which rather suggests he was. I mean, you applied handcuffs for what reason? Because, I mean, we can go back and look at what you had to say in the Annex A at tab 16 for you, Chair, CJS 005652 at page 16. He was controlled on the floor. I made the decision that I move 687 from the area. He would need to be handcuffed for his own safety and the safety of officers. I applied the ratchet cuffs to him when he was on the floor. I mean, if ever there was an opportunity for you to say he was thrashing around with his legs and arms, that was it, don't you think? I mean,
Yes,
this
yes,
is
I
when
do.
it was fresh in your memory, not January 2018.
Yeah, it was implicit, not explicit, and I should have made it explicit.
Can I suggest it's not even implicit? What is explicit is that it was generally for the safety of him and for the safety of you and your brother officers. But there is nothing here you will accept, Mr. Donnelly. I mean, you can shake the page, but the letters are still there. And there's nothing there about legs and arms flailing or lashing around, is there?
No, there isn't.
No. And so some listening to this may think that you have embellished your account with the PSU in January 2018 to improve your position when you were being quizzed about what happened. Is that the truth of it?
No, it's not.
You'll remember the G4S investigation report, and we can go back to that, tab 19. I'm moving on to something different, Mr. Donnelly, tab 19, CJS 005952. And if we go to page 2, allegation 1 happened to precede the events with D865 by 1 day, because this is on the 3rd of July, when you said of detainees who go on hunger strike that, quote, I don't know if these guys here have all got overprotective mums, end quote, imitated a mother feeding a baby and said, quote, they think we are all as soft as shite and will let them out, end quote. Can we go please to the next page, page 3? And we'll see allegation 1 is there set out on the in the top half, top 2/3 of this page. About halfway down, you were asked about this allegation. Initially said he did not remember the incident and said it wasn't usually how he would talk. When pressed further, you accepted that you may well have made these comments to colleagues. When asked again why, you said this was relating to when they misbehaved, we just let them back out again. And then you acknowledged the comments were inappropriate and you appeared genuinely regretful. So, just we understand, Mr. Donnelly, did you end up actually accepting, despite denial, that you did say these things?
I don't have any recollection of saying that. But I'm not going to deny that I said it.
Right, so why did you acknowledge the comments were inappropriate? Well, what was the point in genuine regret if you hadn't said them?
Because they were inappropriate because we should be talking about residents in that
Yeah.
way.
So where do we end up with this? You said them. You accept you said those words. I mean, where are we going to end up with this, Mr. Donnelly? You accept you said them. You may have said them. You don't remember saying them, but you accept if you said them, they were inappropriate. What is it?
If I said them, they were inappropriate.
If I said them,
Yeah.
but you're
I
not.
don't have any recollection of saying those words.
Because if you did, they provide a little window into you, don't they? Into what you thought about the detainees who you say you cared for.
And I do.
Yeah.
On that point, the food and fluid refusal, in ACDT reviews, if somebody is on food and fluid refusal, I'm quite open with them, trying to encourage them to stop it. Because it's not a substitute for a legal defence.
No. So that rather suggests that you're prepared to accept that you may have said something like this.
I may have said it, but I don't remember saying it.
And did you think that they thought you were all as soft as shite and would let them out? Is that something you said or were likely to have said?
I don't remember saying it.
Did you think food refusal was a kind of misbehaviour?
For some detainees did believe that it was a means of being released from the centre.
Those were the manipulative ones, not the genuinely ill ones.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I assume if I was to ask you whether there was a toxic culture at Brook House during this period, it's nothing you would recognise.
I didn't find it toxic, no.
I'm going to move on now to something else that you've been asked to consider, D1853, in relation to the 11th of June. Now, on that occasion, you were the DCM in charge of use of force, and we can look, please, at another use of force form. It's tab 15, Chair, CJS 005591. And when we get there, if we go to page 22, please. This is the briefing document. And if we look at the top, you see your name, briefing script. It's 5 in the morning, the 11th of June. Current situation is that detainee 1853 is currently in B115, so that's B wing. Is that right? Room 115 in B wing.
Yeah.
Has escorted removal directions to the Netherlands. And just tell us what escorted removal directions means, please, for anybody watching in who doesn't understand the jargon. What does that mean?
It means that the crew that's dispatched will be on the aeroplane with the resident, and therefore they can take him under restraint, and therefore we're obliged to present him under restraint if necessary.
And removal directions are the directions from the Home Office to remove someone from the country.
That's correct.
So he was off to the Netherlands that morning with Taskor. After speaking with 1853, he's refused several requests to walk compliantly with us to meet with Taskor, stating his solicitor has told him to stay here. So do we understand it that you had been to see him originally to tell him you're off to the Netherlands, you've got removal directions, will you go peacefully? His response to you was no, and therefore you decide that there has to be a planned use of force in order to effect his removal to the Taskor escort.
Yes.
You add he had been in prison, history of poor custodial behaviour, assaults, threats and fighting, previously refused to transfer for removal directions in the April of that year. The plan is then set out. You will go to the room with a team of officers in full PPE, that's what effectively riot gear, personal protective equipment, and then you describe the entry to the room, which will be facilitated by you. You'll explain to him again that he has a flight that morning. You need him to get up and come with you to meet with the escorts. So I'm not going to read any more of that out, at least for the moment. When we look, please, at page 9 of this document, I was wondering where that noise was coming from, and then I realised it was me. Forgive me. If we look at page 9, for example, and I'm just plucking an example of the same document, we see the statement which was compiled by one of the DCOs, Ollie White, who was involved in the use of force. And it's a bit difficult to read. I wonder if you can just expand it a smidge, please. Thank you. And about 5 lines down, he says we got kitted up in a team of 4 officers, Johnny Martin, Andy Simmons, Mohammed Shaukat, given the initial brief by Chris Donnelly, informed of the situation, our roles, and he talks about the role he was given. Then a few lines down, as DCM Donnelly asked 1853 if he was going to walk down with us, he then proceeded to say, I've got razor blades in my mouth and I'm going to swallow them. At no point, says White, did I see any razor blades in the mouth of the detainee when he opened it, and after being asked for a second time by Donnelly, we were given instruction to advance into the room. And then at the foot of the page, he wasn't taken by the Taskor escorts due to them not having a nurse present with their escort team, as he said he still had a blade in his mouth. And because of this, he was placed into one of the CSU rooms at 5:16. If we look, please. I mean, we can look at other officers. I'm not going to in the interest of saving time. But what I will ask us all to look at is the final page of this document, page 25. Because this is a report written by Grace Silahi, who I think was one of the healthcare nurses.
Yes.
In relation to this individual, it's part of her report of injury to detainee. And the time and date of examination, 11th of June at a few minutes after 5 in the morning, excuse me, went to room with officers. They informed detainee that he has a flight. He stated he has blades in his mouth. Team went in and was transferred to CSU, where he was handed over to overseas. Does that mean handed over to Taskor?
Yes.
One blade fell out from his mouth, according to the team of escort. They saw one blade and was unable to take him. No medic on site with them, no injuries sustained. So that seems to have been what happened. He says he's got blades in his mouth. The use of force is executed. He's removed to the CSU, but after all, he doesn't go because Taskor weren't prepared to take him in the circumstances where he might have, and in fact did have, a razor blade or blades in his mouth. Yeah? Well, first of all, a few questions, please. Had you yourself received training on how to respond to and de-escalate episodes such as this?
Not specifically, no.
Once he told you that he had razor blades in his mouth, and these are questions I'm asked to ask you on behalf of Bat Murphy. Once he told you, why didn't you consider that an emergency medical response was required rather than execute the use of force plan?
It was an escorted removal, so we were obliged to present him. If he had swallowed a blade, it would not have presented a huge medical problem. They passed straight through the body. So I thought it was safe to continue.
How confident can you be, Mr. Donnelly, that when somebody swallows razor blades, no great injury is going to be occasioned to them?
It's happened quite a few times.
And how often has it happened that somebody has done themselves some serious damage?
Never.
Never?
No.
In your experience?
Yes.
So, as far as you're concerned, the threat to swallow razor blades is an empty threat?
Yes.
Right. Why did the escort crew refuse to take him?
because he still had one in his mouth, which he may subsequently have produced on the plane
Yeah.
and maybe self-harmed.
And what about your officers and yourself? When he tells you he's got 2 razor blades in his mouth, and you execute the use of force plan, how did you guard against the risk, even if what you say is right, that there was no possibility of him doing any personal injury to himself? How do you guard against the risk he takes a razor blade out of his mouth and slashes one of your officers around the neck? Or even if they're wearing a helmet, maybe not, but to an arm or to the back or to the front. How do you guard against that?
Basically, the PPE and the training that they receive.
Can you speak up just...
Sorry, they were all wearing PPE.
Yeah, I know.
And the training that they'd received, so they would enter the room quickly, very quickly, and take control of the resident.
You weren't wearing PPE though, were you?
No.
No. Do you accept or do you not that this was a fairly dangerous thing to effect control and restraint removal in those circumstances?
I don't accept that, no.
Did you ever feel that there was pressure on you and your officers to effect a removal at all costs, even where a detainee was telling you he had razor blades in his mouth?
There was pressure, yes, to present residents.
Do you think you took risks, unnecessary risks, because of it?
I don't feel so, no.
Well, against that, Mr. Donnelly, you will have seen this footage, which we have quite recently received from G4S, and I'm going to show it now. But, Chair, because it's unpixelated, it's not redacted, and because it shows the detainee's face and identifies him for that reason, I'm going to ask that the inquiry, this hearing, goes into closed session, which means I'm afraid that it will not be open to the public, and what I'm about to show will not be live streamed. And then when it's completed, which won't take very long, we will come back into open session and I will ask Mr. Donnelly some questions about it.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
So if somebody can tell me when we're ready to proceed. So, Mr. Donnelly, you were the manager, obviously shown on this footage, yeah?
Yes.
And you were clearly supervising this use of force, yeah?
Yes.
And as we clearly hear for ourselves, the moment the door is open, he says, "I've got 2 blades in my mouth." And obviously you order the officers in to commence the control and restraint. And again, you felt there was nothing inappropriate about it in the circumstances. That's what
Yeah.
you're telling us. Do you remember hearing yourself saying to him at the time that the other officers have control of him, and when he's telling you that I've got razors in my mouth, and he screams and we can hear some grunting, and then he says, "I swallowed a razor," and about 40 seconds in, you say, "Doesn't matter about razors, mate, swallow as many as you want." Do you remember saying that?
Well, it's on the footage.
Yeah. Why'd you say that?
Just to let him know that he's not going to harm himself by swallowing razor blades.
Doesn't matter about razors, mate, swallow as many as you want. So that was designed to tell him that it was open to him to swallow as many razors as he had in his mouth.
It wouldn't do him any harm, no.
And then when he's taken down the stairs, he says, "I've got razors in my fucking mouth. See that, nurse? Yeah, blood, blood. Look, fucking blood." Do you remember seeing any blood?
No.
No. Was he making that up?
It's the first time I've seen the footage
Yeah.
today. I didn't see any blood.
Yeah. So you looking at that now, Mr. Donnelly, you see nothing wrong with any of it? What you said, what you did, what you directed your officers to do?
I probably shouldn't have said swallow as many as you like.
No. Probably shouldn't have said.
Shouldn't have said.
No.
But I think the use of force.
Say that again?
The use of force needed to go ahead.
Because you were under pressure, or it just needed to go ahead?
Well, we're obliged to present residents for escorted removal.
Can we put up another document, please? HOM 004424. And Chair, you'll find this in the final tab in the second volume.
Thank you.
This is your incident report, written up by you at 5:08 that morning. And if we go to the narrative account on the next page, IDCM should be on page 3. IDCM Chris Donnelly was on duty at Brook House on the 11th of June night shift as Oscar 2. We were aware that detainee 1853 in B115 had escorted removal directions to the Netherlands today with an approximate pickup time of 4:30. We'd been informed by the day staff that he had been spoken to regarding his flight, and we were informed he was happy to go, been left on his own in room, whatever it was, as a precaution. At approximately 4:30, myself and Oscar 1, DCM Dave Aldis, went to talk to him about his flight. He told us he was refusing to go on his flight. He said his solicitor had told him to refuse as he had a good case. We explained that we had to present him to the escorts as it was an escorted flight due to a previous refusal of unescorted RDs, that's removal directions. We tried at length to get 1853 to come down to talk to the escorts. He refused. We informed him that if he didn't comply, force would be necessary, as it was a lawful instruction from the Home Office. And then to the next page, he still refused. We had no option then but to assemble a team of officers in PPE for a planned use of force to present him to task or overseas escorts. The team was assembled. and you deal with that. DCM Aldis had spoken to Tasker overseas, who said they would take him as long as he hadn't started a dirty protest. They said they would accept him under restraint. I went to the door with the team behind me. I opened the door to 1853 to walk compliantly. He immediately said, "I've got blades in my mouth." I told the team to enter and take control of 1853, which they did. Handcuffs were applied. He was moved under restraint down the CNR stairwell to CSU to meet waiting Tasker escorts. During Tasker's search, he showed them, what does that read? A blade. What's the next word? He had in his mouth?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One blade fell out of his mouth during the search. Tasker refused to take him due to the blades, as he didn't have a medic. He was then placed in CSU under Rule 40 for disruptive behaviour. I assume what you said to him, the comment you made, swallow as many as you want, was left out of account here because wouldn't have made you look particularly good, would it, Mr. Donnelly? To have included it? It's not a complete account, is it?
No, it's not.
No. And why did you leave out of account, however bad it made you look, the comment you made to him?
I don't honestly remember making it. I also didn't mention that we let his head up during the use of force.
Can you say that again?
I made the decision to get the head officer to release his head. I didn't put that in either.
Yeah. What I'm just wondering, Mr. Donnelly, is whether whenever we look at these incident reports or use of force reports, because if we went through the use of force report, we won't find, I think, any of your brother officers mentioning it either. Do people pick and choose what they're prepared to put in their statements?
I don't remember saying it. You don't write down every single thing that you say during an incident.
The final thing I'm going to ask you about is an entirely different incident. And this is one that concerns you in an indirect kind of way. It's a complaint made by another detained person, D119, in July of 2017 about two incidents on the 21st and 23rd of that month. And so can we go please to an entirely different document, tab 10, Chair, CJS 001415, please. And this is a complaint document, Mr. Donnelly, completed by D119 at Brook House. And if we go to the next page, page 2, we see written out, presumably by the detained man or on his behalf, on Friday the 21st of July, I spoke to DCO Tayron Evans, as she didn't let me out of my room for my lunchtime cleaning duties. She was rude to me and slammed the door, narrowly missing my face. Today, she once again refused, and today, therefore, being the 23rd, which is the date of the document, today she once again refused to let me out for my cleaning duties, despite letting other workers out on the same floor as me. When I rang my call bell to speak to the officer, she called me a knobhead and hung up. She was very rude, and I asked to speak to DCM Steve Dix. I spoke to DCM Dix with DCO Evans, and she confirmed she had called me a knobhead. She was rude to myself and the manager and stormed out of the office. So that was the nature of the complaint. And if we go, please, to a letter that you were responsible for on the next page, page 3. We see at the top, the date is the 21st of August. Thank you for your complaint, dated the 23rd of July. Treatment you received from an officer at Brook House. I'm writing to advise that I've now completed my investigation and would like to offer the following response. And first of all, do you remember what the investigation involved? Did you speak to everybody involved?
That's what we would normally do. I don't actually remember
Yeah.
the incident, but yeah, you speak to everybody you can, really.
Yeah. The investigation was conducted by myself, involved speaking to the staff involved, reviewing security reports. Your complaint contained one main issue which has been investigated. You felt unhappy that a particular officer didn't let you out to complete your cleaning duties on 2 separate occasions and was rude to you. You stated that on the 21st, and here you simply recite the complaint which I've already read. After receiving your complaint, I went to speak to the officer in question and detainee custody manager Dix, who you mentioned, to discuss the incident further. I also reviewed security reports submitted at the time by the officer regarding the events of that day. The Deputy Director in head of Brook House, Steve Skitt, has commissioned a separate internal investigation to be completed under the company disciplinary procedures. And I can confirm that at this point that concern has been identified. The internal investigation is still ongoing at present, but Mr. Skitt has confirmed that he will advise the Home Office with the full outcome from this investigation. Over page, please. At this point, I can confirm that your complaint will be upheld due to you not being allowed out of your room to carry out your cleaning duties. I would also like to apologise for the behaviour displayed by the member of staff in question, and I can assure you that we do not condone bad behaviour from residents or staff, and this is what the ongoing investigation, internal investigation, is looking into further. I hope you feel satisfied with the way in which your complaint has been handled. However, should you wish to discuss any aspect of it, please feel free to contact me. Now, you upheld that complaint, yeah?
Yes.
In your first witness statement, and something you told us a little earlier, I thought you said you had never witnessed any verbal abuse by staff to detained persons. So when you use the word witness in your statement, you mean actually hear it
Yes.
or experience it yourself.
Yes.
But here, the allegation, amongst others, was that this DCO had called this man a knobhead.
Mm.
Yeah. But because you hadn't witnessed it, that is something qualitatively different to, as it were, what you had to investigate. So here was something indirect. You hadn't directly heard anybody use any such language towards any detainee in all the years you'd been there.
Yes.
That's what you're telling us. Because as you said, abuse was a one-way street.
I didn't witness this.
No. But you knew about it. So abuse
Right.
clearly wasn't a one-way street, was it?
No.
No. And you apologised for the behaviour of this DCO, and that behaviour included the rudeness, presumably,
Yes.
and calling this man a knobhead. And something else you told us a little earlier as well, and this is in paragraph 14 of your first witness statement. Do you remember in the witness statement you said you'd never once upheld a complaint, apart from those dealing with loss of personal items?
Yes.
Well, here's just one example.
Yeah.
So how accurate is the evidence that you've given by way of your witness statements to this inquiry, do you think, Mr. Donnelly? Or are you painting a picture of Brook House and of your own duties and responsibilities which plainly isn't accurate?
I'd completely forgotten about that complaint.
Well, you've had this material, and you could have corrected it, couldn't you, at
Yes.
any time, and said, actually, I made a terrible mistake, because this is one example where I did uphold a complaint of verbal abuse by a DCO towards a detainee. Did you think, Mr. Donnelly, that you're a little in denial about Brook House during the G4S years? Do you think you're a little in denial about the reality of life there?
I don't think so, no.
You don't think so? All right. Chair, that's all I'm going to ask. Do you have any questions?
I do, just two, Mr. Donnelly. And I won't keep you any longer than necessary. The first is, you obviously, as Mr. Altman was just saying, that you've told us, and you've put it in your witness statement as well, that you didn't witness any of the types of behaviours or language that we saw on the Panorama documentary. In your opinion, is it possible that staff could have deliberately not used certain language or not behaved in a certain way around you or other members of staff if they believed that there would be certain repercussions for that?
I think it's possible, yes. I mean, the DCMs are kind of like the bosses on the day, not obviously senior management, but it's possible that they wouldn't do it in front of us.
Okay, thank you. Related to that, when there were, for example, inspections taking place, and you've obviously worked at Brook House for a number of years and therefore will have experienced a number of inspections. In your own experience, do you think there's ever a change in behaviour of staff or managers or senior managers when they are aware that they're under scrutiny?
What, when the inspectors are in? Not in my opinion. I think we just carry on as normal and wait for the report to come out and do a remedial action plan.
Okay. Sorry, 3 questions. There's one final one as well. You talked, Mr. Altman asked you about exposure to traumatic events, such as somebody self-harming. Mr. Altman asked you questions about what was available in terms of services for detained people who may have witnessed traumatic events. As a member of staff witnessing traumatic events, whether that's literally seeing something happen, whether it's being part of somebody who may cut somebody down or respond to a self-harm incident, what happens to a member of staff following an incident?
From memory, there was a care team, which is a team of people dedicated, but I think you had to sort of reach out to them. They wouldn't routinely come and seek you out if you needed sort of to talk about it or anything like that.
Do you ever remember seeking them out?
No.
Are you aware of any other staff seeking that care team out following incidents?
Not that I can recall. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's just that it's kind of a private thing, so nobody, the whole place wouldn't know that somebody had sought support.
But they wouldn't be visible necessarily following an incident, would make themselves known to you, follow up with people, for example?
Not really, no.
Okay, thank you. Do any senior managers during the relevant period, would a senior manager ever come and speak to you following a self-harm incident or another potentially traumatic incident?
No. Not to my recollection.
Does that ever happen now?
I would say it's getting better. We have sort of more formalised kind of debriefs, and the question is asked. We've got a social worker who's in charge of the care team, so they are a lot more proactive now than they were.
So would you say, on balance, that is it easier to access talking to somebody after an incident like that?
Yes, and I think at Circle they approach you.
I'm sorry.
Rather than the other way around.
I'm sorry, that they would be more
They will
proactive.
seek you out. So a member of the care team or our social worker will come and say, "How are you?"
Okay. Thank you. I have no other questions. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Donnelly. I understand it's not an easy experience, but I'm grateful for your evidence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, 10 o'clock tomorrow when we have Mr. Pashani.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you tomorrow at 10.
All right.